Hello and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy and governance. I'm Shafiu Suleiman. On our tidbits, former President Olusegun Obasanjo criticized the judgments of the Nigerian judges in electoral disputes, stating that a handful of judges ranging from 3 to 5 shouldn't have the authority to overturn decisions made by millions of voters during an election. Obasanjo strongly disapproved of the concentrated power in the hands of a small number of judges, deeming it as completely unacceptable. The former Nigerian president spoke in response to recent rulings by the Court of Appeal regarding electoral disputes arising from the 23 elections, which resulted in the removal of 3 governors, Dauda Lawan of Zamfara State, Abba Kabir Yusuf in Kano, and Caleb Mufang of Plateau State. Expressing his concerns during a high-level consultation on rethinking Western liberal democracy in Africa at the Olusegun Obasanjo Presidential Library in Abeokuta, Ogun State, Obasanjo condemned what he labeled as decisive proclamations by the judges, emphasizing that regardless of the type of democracy or governance system in place, the decisions of a few individuals in the judiciary should not hold the power to overturn the collective choices made by millions of voters. Still on our tidbits, the Senate Committee on Electoral Matters outlined plans to mandate the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, to upload election results, a move prompted by the absence of a legal requirement for such action in the current law. Senator Sharifuddin Ali, the committee's chairman, highlighted the committee's effort to amend this law to enforce the compulsory uploading of election results by INEC. Moreover, the committee proposed electoral reforms encompassing the resolution of pre-election matters before polling, concluding election petitions prior to swearing-in ceremonies, and setting specific timelines for petition filing and resolutions to prevent upcycle elections. He also stressed the need for technological improvements in elections, acknowledging past setbacks and experiencing the committee's intent to urge INEC to address these as for future electoral processes. Now, joining me to discuss issues around Nigeria's democracy and how reforming its electoral processes can be strengthened, I have in the studio Chima Christian, a public policy expert and good governance advocate. Welcome, Chima.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you once again.
Thank you.
Okay, we commence the conversation perhaps after this short break. Stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us. And now the conversation begins. Chima, yes, you've heard some of those tidbits. Let's start by looking at them one after the other. Let's start with the position of former President Olusegun Obasanjo in respect of the composition of judges, or rather the reasoning of judges, especially of the appeal court now, sacking a number of governors, largely governors from the opposition political parties. This has raised a lot of concerns among the political class, among the citizens, and so on. What do you make up with the submission that it is not ideal, for only 3 persons to sit down and nullify elections where millions of people took time, under rain and the shine and the sun and all of that to vote for leaders of their choice?
Well, I want to draw the line from 1993. And if you draw the line, you will find that Nigeria has made substantial progress in election management since 1993. You had an outright annulment in 1993 to a period between 1999 and perhaps 2007, where if you wanted to win elections, you have to hire thugs to snatch ballot boxes for you. And now we have moved to a point where elections have become somewhat credible. And that's why people now know that their votes count. And that's why you saw the era of voter inducement. But today we are fast moving away from voter inducement to get into a period where if you want to snatch ballot boxes, you have to hire a few senior advocates of Nigeria to go to the Supreme Court or the Appeal Court to attempt to snatch ballot boxes for you. And what Obasanjo has just described could be an attempt to use the legal instruments to snatch ballot boxes. Since the doubts have been weeded out of the system, let's engage senior advocates, let's engage Supreme Court justices, let's engage, for instance, appeal courts to attempt to overrun the mandate of the people. And I don't believe that that was the intent of the people, the drafters of our Constitution. You have your Supreme Court, your appeal courts, as a court that want to adjudicate over electoral disputes. But what we've seen now is that the court is abusing those powers and have ultimately arrogated themselves the powers to decide. And so, therefore, the common man is no longer devoted today. It is a 5-man panel, a 3-man panel, or a 7-man panel of court justices that now decide. So why are we wasting our time with elections if we will finish voting and the courts will do otherwise? So why don't we just do away with the chariot and then ask the Supreme Court or the Appeal Court to choose who they want to govern us? And I don't think that's what the Constitution had in mind. So if you heard that Nigeria overcame the issue of annulment of elections, and Nigeria overcame the issue of ballot box snatching by thugs, and now you have the issue of ballot box snatching at the courts, I believe that with concerted efforts...
Is it actually snatching? Because some would say there's nothing wrong in having litigations around elections, you know. It's part of the deepening democracy.
Indeed.
Anyone who felt, you know, aggrieved at the level of election now
go to court.
has the legal angle to ventilate. Now you go to court, and if you have your evidences and what is required, you know, to get justice, you get it. These judges, you know, don't just wake up overnight and just decide, or dish out judgment.
Yes.
They have to go through the processes, listen to the arguments by parties, look at the issues for determination, look at the grounds of, you know, petition or appeal in the case of appeal and so on, before they arrive at a conclusion and reasoning.
Well, that's not the feeling, and that's not the way Nigerians view them, and it's for a good reason, because you don't want to be at the two extremes. Nigeria is now at the two, has experienced the two extremes. One, you had a period where if you finished elections and you're approaching the courts, there's nothing for you. There's nothing there for you. And because there was no judgment, except for the first time you had a judgment, I think in Anambra, that restored the mandate of P2B, right? And now you've gotten to a place where you are no longer even sure of what the judgment could be. I mean, the incumbent could be sacked, the member of the, so you don't even know. And then
but
the problem,
ordinarily should be pregnant.
Then
you shouldn't know what is in there.
But there should be some level of consistency. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going into meta-analysis. But one key point is this, that for instance, Appeal Court has decided on pre-election issues, on party nomination, on your ability as an outsider to question the authenticity of a member of another party you do not belong. That issue has been settled by the Appeal Court. And so when we see the same courts making diverse decisions on the same matter and overriding the previous decisions, so you can't say that the law is fixed on a particular matter, right? So,
the inconsistency,
and these inconsistencies have begun to give people the feeling that perhaps the judiciary cannot be trusted. And because of that, you now see that the cases going to the judiciary, to the judges, no longer, you can't determine them on the basis of the facts of the matter, that they may be determined by whatever consideration, and we don't know how these judges make their decisions. We don't know whether they are coerced, we don't know whether they are induced, and we don't know with which eyes through which they see laws and they see white, and then they come back to tell Nigerians that what we saw as white in the morning is now blue in the evening.
You're pointing a very scary scenario, looking at the fact that judiciary ought to be the last hope for the common man and an independent arm of government. In fact, a very important arm of government, because it settles disputes between the executive, between the legislature, and then make certain pronouncements that are of policy, have policy impact and so on and so forth. So at what point are we losing it? Because if there's a trust deficit between the public and the judiciary, then where is the rule of law?
Well, that's where we're headed to. And in fact, it has started happening already. Several judicial pronouncements against the federal government have not been obeyed, not just by this government, by previous governments. And we can cite instances where the courts will order something, DSS, for instance, will refuse to obey, right? And that's on one level. We've also seen, for instance, in the last industrial action that was about to be embarked by, I think, Trade Union Congress and NLC, the federal government secured a court injunction against them, but they went ahead with their industrial action, and they came on live TV and they said that the courts belong to the federal government and that they are not duty bound to obey the court of the federal government, because the federal government cannot smite it on one hand and then use the court to take it away. So you're seeing that people are now beginning to challenge the decisions of the court, that people no longer see it as the court of the last common man, that it's no longer the court or the place of last resort. That in Nigeria today, what seems to be happening is that might is right. So if you're strong enough to bully your way into it, go ahead and do it. And so that's what the judiciary is painting. And if they don't see what the dangers are in what they are doing, then we can't help them. Because if they don't see that if people lose complete confidence in that system, that what you have in the society is anarchy and chaos.
And we're beginning to see how people are reacting to some of these judgments. Some certain comments, you find them extremely unpalatable. Now, people talking to judiciary as if they're talking, taking a swipe on the judiciary, analyzing its judgments and then casting aspersions, calling names and so on. And people are beginning to find it extremely strange. The judiciary used to be a very respected arm of government. At some point, you don't even talk about, issues that are before the courts. But you're beginning to see how judges are being challenged, are being, talked to in that manner, without any recourse to. Where are we heading to?
What you are describing now is that the court has lost its moral authority. So why should we respect the courts? That's the question before Nigerians. Now, why should we respect them? Should they give us a reason to trust them? Why would we respect what they are doing since we don't understand what they are doing? So either the court redeems its image or Nigerians will take back the power we give to them. Because you see, you are a citizen, I am a citizen. You're just citizens. We decided to carry all our powers and give it to you through a legal process. We donated the powers. And if you have begun now to abuse the powers that were willingly donated to you, very soon people will collect the powers back from you, right? And that is what is happening. People are saying we want to take back our power. We no longer want the court system. And that will happen. And it's already happening. And then if you don't see where it is headed, sit back for a moment. And look at where the courts will finish the judicial decisions, and you see riots in the streets.
There's some are beginning to erupt. The judgment for the plateau generated some ripple reactions now.
That of also
burning tires and what have you. And in Kano, again, there was protests, mass protests of assault against.
And judges should see the handwriting on the wall and see the logical conclusion of that trend, because once it starts, it usually goes upwards. And from that, skirmishes around judicial pronouncements, trace it upward, and then you will see the logical conclusion.
These are fundamental aspects, if you like, or pillars of democracy. You can't have democracy without the rule of law. At the same time, judiciary as an arm of government is very, very critical to the survival of democracy.
Yes.
Yeah, we're beginning to see people questioning the integrity and of course, the honesty of electoral umpire, for instance, the INEC. Substantially, people are losing confidence in INEC, making pronouncements of declaring winners that are, in a very disputed elections and so on and so forth. And then the judiciary. Before then, the security architecture is also being seen to be having compromised and so on and so forth. So with all of this, then where is our democracy?
Well, what you've just described has been written. I think I authored an article called Navigating a Post-Trust Nigeria. What you're describing is just happening with the institutions of government. See, people trust as an essential component of the society has broken down almost completely in Nigeria. And this is not just with the institutions. I'll give you two instances. people no longer trust their tailors. So if you have a wedding this weekend, you have to beforehand shift the date forward just so that you won't be disappointed. If you are in the UK or the US, you tell your tailor the dates and he gives you the dates. You come in there, pick up your clothes. Yes. But in Nigeria, people no longer trust their tailors. Today, Nigerians can no longer send their cars to mechanic and go home. You have to police them. You have to wait for them.
You know what will happen if
yes, you want to be there. Else, sometimes you could have missing
even
pass.
if you are there, things still happen.
Things still happen. So there is that breakdown of trust. So you don't even trust the traffic lights. That when it says green, you have to be sure. You have to be sure that nobody is coming. Person is running against the traffic and wants to smash it. So what can you trust? So if you can't trust at that societal level, then at the institutional level, you've talked about police, you've talked about judiciary, you've talked about INEC. Indeed, what organ, what agency, what ministry, what department, what arm of government, is it the executive, the legislature, the judiciary? What part of it can you say that, okay, this is now what Nigerians can use to hold body in our own palace? None of them. So how do you navigate a post-trust society? That's the question. And I'm beginning to think that Nigerians have found the answers. Because anywhere you find a society where you cannot trust, it's a complete different thing. Because you don't trust the medical doctors. You don't trust the drugs you're buying over the counters. You don't trust the things you're buying at markets. You don't trust anything. In fact, while you're going to work that the fare was 500 naira, you don't even trust that I'm coming back from work that the fare is still 500 naira. So in that kind of system, Nigerians have found a way. Nigerians now know how to navigate around their tailors. Nigerians have now found a way around their, for instance, mechanics. Nigerians have found a way against their artisans. Nigerians have, even people who now hire people for private lessons, now put cameras in the rooms where teachers are giving because people have found that you can no longer trust. If that is the case at the basic societal level, at the individual level, I am now advocating that we'll take that wisdom and cascade it up to the national level. Today, we can no longer trust INEC. I'll give you an instance. By 14 minutes past 1 on the presidential election day, February 25th, INEC was still recruiting ad hoc staff in Anambra State to do their word collation in the whole of Anambra State. And so INEC was coming to tell us we are ready, we are ready, we are ready. On the election day, no ad hoc staff. And so what you then do is that you have to police INEC. If they say they have acquired devices, you police them to audit those devices. If they say they have recruited, you police them to be sure that they've done that. If they said that they've done, you police. So eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And again, these institutions were designed to function. We are supposed to give INEC the responsibility and go to bed. But now we have seen that if you're going to bed, that your mattress can be carried in the middle of the night. So what do? You stay awake.
And the primary responsibility of checking the excesses of the arms of government, for instance, is perhaps also eroding. Let's take the National Assembly, for instance, which has enormous roles, in terms. But then, to give it to them, we read one of the tidbits.
Yes.
I mean, the lawmakers are making efforts to see that they make certain adjustments even before, a full-fledged electoral reform or so. I mean, some of the contentious issues around, transmission of results, around addressing the issue of off-season elections, which is also fundamental. Now, a number of people are taking advantage of these gaps, of this distorted calendar, electioneering calendar. To perfect some of those things. Because where you have an off-season election in 1 or 2 states or 3, some people will deploy whatever they have to ensure that they win at all costs. But if we are having a unified electoral calendar, for instance, it might be a bit difficult to do that. So the National Assembly, in spite of its limitations or challenges, is also looking at some key issues that would help address some of these problems.
Well, I don't want the National Assembly to lead in that regard, and I have my reason.
Okay.
They are all part of the same issue. I think Nigerians should
be beneficiaries.
They are beneficiaries of this.
They are interested party.
If you look at the people within the National Assembly that are driving this, and that's why I've kept on saying that we have lazy opposition in Nigeria. I mean, you would expect that PDP and Labour Party will be at the forefront of writing the laws. You are allowing APC lawmakers again to write the laws. And these things are deliberately written. And where they can insert loopholes will be inserted. Where they can put backdoors will be put. For instance, when you have elected, you have your laws acknowledging the use of beavers. Your laws did not make it outrightly unlawful not to upload.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things
that's the window given,
so
to INEC
you saw
to
that
decide.
you saw that window has been exploited. I mean, today many Nigerians have lost total confidence, lack of confidence in the system because of a window that was inserted. So I expect the Labour Party, I expect the civil society, I expect the People's Democratic Party to lead in this regard. You cannot be planning for an election in 2027 and you allow your opponent to be writing the law in 2023. It does not make sense. So if you're going to participate in that election, you are now going to be participating. And by the way, you're not just talking about, there are 3 sets of laws governing elections in Nigeria. Yeah. One is the Constitution, relevant sections. Yeah. 2 is the Electoral Act. But the most insidious I see here that people don't pay attention to is INEC guidelines.
Yeah.
So why have we not critiqued INEC guidelines?
And they are also binding.
Yes. So why have we not critiqued INEC guidelines? Why do we have to allow INEC to come up with their own guidelines? I mean, the stakeholders are supposed to make substantial input into the making of these guidelines. I'll give you another instance. You say, okay, people can come around and become election observers or party agents, and they can become party collation agents. Today, we are now doing e-transmission. Who do we have in the party that is at the room, where the server room, to be sure that the server is not being tampered with, to be sure that the protocols are not being changed midway into the elections? So now that you have moved a part of the election, substantial part of it electronically, it is apposite, it is only appropriate that people are now allowed to be in the server room to also see what is happening there. So you can't keep people...
eliminate completely the human aspect of it.
Beautiful. So you have to integrate these systems, the systems and the processes, and then you do what you call human interactions with systems. If you have designed a foolproof system, and then you give it to an individual who can corrupt the system, then the whole essence of the system has been eroded, because you bring in these devices to show up voter confidence, to have a more credible outcome. But don't come to tell us that, oh, the devices are working well, but the human beings. There is an aspect of technology called human interactions with systems. And so you must have to do your analysis to see these systems that we are designing, how will human interactions affect their usability? How can people compromise them? Your server, can people change the IP and the protocols midway into the elections? Can people turn it off midway into the elections? Can people compromise the beavers? Can people delay the uploads of the results? And these things are things you can rely on. I'll give you another instance. Let's move away quickly from elections and come back to it. Look at the NPC that is about to conduct a major national exercise. They are saying that they have deployed geospatial devices, that they have acquired PDAs, that they have acquired all those devices. But nobody has seen the vulnerability reports of these systems. Because if you say that you've acquired PVB, and then you see it's costing us nearly 800 billion to conduct census, and then if you're spending a substantial amount of our money to acquire gadgets and devices, don't come after the census to tell us, oh, your devices were well, but the individuals handling them. So because if you give a system that can be manipulated to an individual, whether the individual is coerced or induced, then they can manipulate the systems. That's why you subject these systems to independent stakeholder review and audits, public scrutiny, for us to determine the vulnerability of these systems. And where upgrades need to be made, upgrades will be made. And where you have to have slight amendment of the processes. So those are the things you do before the fact. You don't just buy devices and use the whole country to do what I call national experimentation. Because what INEC has done with the smart card reader is national experimentation. And it did work the way it did. And what INEC has done with the beavers, after assuring us that it was a game changer, is a major national experimentation. So Nigerians are now lab animals where you use us to test the efficacy of your devices, your systems, and your processes. No, those tests have to be conducted before the fact, not after the fact.
Right, okay. I understand we have to take a break. In case you're just joining us, the program is Daily Politics. We're looking at democratic trajectory in Nigeria with all the imperfections around it and what needs to be done to salvage the situation. I have Chima Christian in the studio, a public policy advocate and also a public affairs commentator. Together we'll be looking at the issues very closely. We'll take a break. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation. Stay with us.
consensus. We did all our best. You see, in politics, you give your contribution to the best of your ability.
If you want, I'll forward to you this statement. You go to this bank and verify.
But there are people who say not spending money is not a virtue in itself.
Let me finish.
Because there's so much to be done.
Let me finish. Now, you don't allow me to explain myself.
The recent development shows abductions are now a factor of informants embedded in community.
It's not about the people of Katsina to say that, no, during my administration I was able to stop insecurity. No, it's about collective responsibility for all of us.
And what we should ask ourselves is not what has been seen, is the life better? Are there more people who are unemployed who have not become employed? Is the level of corruption has gone down? Is there inclusion? All those issues.
We're actually a gas country with associated oil. Our focus has always been on oil, that we have never paid significant attention to gas.
To do it effectively, we need to have honest conversation with ourselves. Government needs to come down from its high horse and communicate with the people and build trust.
There must be a solution. We cannot continue this way. They must come back to the table and agree. So whose child will do deny education? All these children that sit for jam, they want to go to higher institutions.
But just a short while ago you were saying that why bring 10 children when you cannot cater for them? So why bring more universities when you cannot cater for the existing?
Thank you very much for staying with us. It's the Daily Politics. You can do well by joining us across our social platforms in case you miss any part of the show. Back in the studio, I still have Chima. Chima, before the break, you're talking about some of the challenges, especially in respect to our electoral processes and administration and so on. One thing that is glaring is that just as Nigerians are becoming helpless in the sense that they go out, cast their votes, and in the end, those votes can be upturned, they can be invalidated, so many things can happen after the election. So there is no guarantee as to what whoever you elected would emerge, or the popular vote would bring, such leadership that you want. Again, looking at the judiciary, which ought to also look at these imperfections and then remedy it. People are beginning to have even confidence now. INEC is having confidence, after conducting an election that is disputed, tell you to go to court. And when you get to the courts, whatever you get, especially when you get to the Supreme Court, that's the last bus stop. So whether you like it or not, whether it is good or bad, you have to take it the way it is. Now, this helpless situation, Nigerians are finding themselves. How do you think, because it could trigger some sort of reactions that we're beginning to see now, just like we mentioned earlier. People are beginning to lose confidence in all of this and then beginning to take back, so to speak. How do we address this before it blossoms into something else?
Well, I think that I would love to believe that Nigerians still retain the agency to steer the country into any direction they wish to. Because like I keep mentioning everywhere I go, there is the demand and there's the supply side of governance. The supply side are legislators, INEC, judiciary. These are supposed to supply good governance. But then you have to have the demand side of governance. You see, in democracy, you're not giving what is due to you. You are giving what you demand for. And if you don't demand for accountable leadership, you won't get it. If you don't demand for credible elections, you won't get it. And so Nigerians, and what we have, by the way, is nagging, is complaining, is beer parlor talks, is lamentation. But these things are not, you have a lot of emotions, you have a lot of energy, but it's not channeled into something productive, right?
But what can Nigerians do differently?
I think that Nigerians can begin to ask important questions, and I believe that Nigerians can begin to mobilize and organize in their clusters to, even if we're not able to affect whole-scale change at one instance, we're able to affect piecemeal changes. For instance, the elections have come and gone. And Nigerians are complaining, Nigerians are nagging. Nigerians knew what exactly happened in 2023, but very few Nigerians are submitting memoranda to the National Assembly as to how the loopholes can be addressed.
Are we even paying attention in the first place? Because in the process of the electoral reform, we have the civil society organizations engaged and they got involved in all of that. You know, the National Assembly had its what they call public hearing and so on and so forth. Nigerians were involved to also look at some of these things that are about to be passed into law. But with all of that, no one realizes that this fundamental device that is going to be used by INEC, which is expected to sanitize the process,
Yes,
is advisory, going by the law. It is not something that is mandatory. So nobody realizes that, okay, the electoral management body could use that as a window to escape, just like it did now.
Yes.
Okay, there are glitches, we resort to manual collation, manual transmission and all of that. And by the way, the law says shall, you know, it is not mandatory.
yes. So you have that, you're right, that's in saying that Nigerians don't pay attention. And yes, we don't pay attention, so we pay attention. For instance, before the elections, the vulnerabilities of these systems, the processes were all known. And the political parties themselves, especially the opposition political parties, have also not done enough. It is not enough to go to fields and to snap pictures with market women and to tell people to come out and you put music for them and they're dancing, wearing your T-shirts, but you will not do well enough to protect the mandate they are going to give you. Since the elections, how many political parties, especially the two dominant opposition political parties, have called for a review to see what were the vulnerabilities of these systems and the processes, and how can we make sure
or mitigate
mitigate it in the next election. But what you see is that you have people come on television, they organize press conference, lambast INEC, and go home.
That's all.
And then you leave the same systems and processes in the hands of your quote-unquote political opponent. I don't want to use enemy. And then your enemy writes the laws, your enemy, quote unquote, okay, let's use opponent. Your opponent writes the laws, your opponent passes the laws, your opponent gets the gadgets approved, your opponent appoints INEC their commissioners, your opponent, and then come 2027, you go to the field and tell the people that you will win. I mean, you're just, I think...
And you cry, you know, cry out for rigging.
And so
you have been rigged out. So, how wouldn't you be rigged out in this kind of atmosphere?
So when you're now telling me about rigging, I will blame the person who attempted to rig the election or who rigged, but we also blame the person who left our door open for people to come in and snatch our ballot boxes. So if the opposition has done their work as opposition and done all the things and ask themselves before going into any contest, what are the fault lines of this system? Don't pretend that you're running for office in the United States of America, for instance. Don't pretend that you're running for office in the United Kingdom. You are not. You are running for office in Nigeria. So you ask yourself, what are the several vulnerabilities and how can we mitigate them? Even if we're not able to stop them completely, how are we able to reduce them? How are we able to substantially minimize the impact on the elections? Because, like I tell you for free, whether Atiku is running, whether Peter Obi is running in 2027, we don't know. But in case they present for themselves for the ballot, Tinubu will not be their biggest opponent. The biggest opponent to any major opposition leader in Nigeria today is voter apathy. And anytime there is voter apathy, the incumbent wins.
That's right. It's to their advantage.
It's to the advantage. And then you will see that our parents never really recovered from 1993. Because shortly after the elections were annulled, the same hope that Nigerians had was dashed. And people never really participated.
And same happens to 2023.
In 2023. And if it is not well managed, that is why I invite the opposition parties. I see them running around now, going around, donating 20 million naira here, donating 20, hugging market women here. They're already campaigning for 2027, but the laws that will govern the elections, the systems that will govern the elections, you are not investing in it. And until you invest in it and then get back Nigerians to see that these issues have been satisfactorily resolved, you will not get people to come out en masse to vote in 2027.
That's right. Okay, let's look at the democracy itself. You know, since 1999, we had an uninterrupted democracy. I think 23 years or 24, you know, from 1999. We have series of transitions, you know, that produce a number of presidents and so on. But going by the submission of former President Olusegun Obasanjo, you know, even though he was also a beneficiary, in fact, the major beneficiary, because he was the one, you know, and that was elected after the military were sent to the barracks, so to speak. Now, he had 8 years as a democratically elected government, president. And he's saying that democracy is not working for Nigeria. Not only Nigeria, it's not working for Africa, because it is not, I mean, it was more forced, to Africans, irrespective of their, I mean, without regard to their vulnerabilities, to their diversities, to their, realities and what have you. So, what do you make up with that submission? Some would say, at least the fact that there is freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and the fact that, there's governance accountability, sort of, because you have periodic elections to change, any government that failed to perform. We don't have that in the military arrangement. But yet, the position is that it's not working for Nigeria.
Well, when you discuss governance systems, there are two issues to look out for. One is form or appearance, and then the other is substance. Over time, commentaries on leadership in Africa has focused on the form and not the substance. What is the form? The form is the rituals or things you call your democracy. For instance, we've had 7 general elections between 1999 and now that produced 5 presidents between 1999 and now, including the incumbent, right? I think you also see what is happening in Liberia, that people are being celebrating George Weah for quote-unquote peaceful transition. And in my analysis, that is you're focusing your energy on the form and not on the substance. Between 1999 and now, okay, let's go back to Liberia. What you are celebrating in Liberia today as peaceful transition, Nigerians also had that kind of discussion in 2015. And so between that peaceful transition and now, are Nigerians feeling better? Are Nigerians going to sleep better? Are Nigerians getting better healthcare? Are Nigerians getting better security? Have Nigeria, quote-unquote, benefited from that peaceful transition?
So beyond the transition, what are the outcomes? And
so people tend to focus on form, democracy, periodic elections, but you're not asking yourself, between the 7 elections that I've mentioned to you that we had in Nigeria between 1999 and now, how has the life of the average Nigerian been impacted? So you are looking at, let's do comparative analysis. Between the last 50 years, what were the nations that made the most leapfrog? You look at Asia, and then you look at China and all of that. But then you go to the Middle East, you look at your Dubai, you look at your Oman, you look at all of those Arab nations. And you ask yourself, the Arab nations, they are not doing democracy. Many African countries are doing democracy. Between the average Arab man, Arabian, and the average Nigerian, who is enjoying the better slices of the pie? So you say that you have freedom to choose. Choose what? Choose who will steal from you.
The form of government. But
so you're focused on the form, but you're not focused on the substance. The essence of governance is to focus on the deliverables. So, but you are focused on the person must wear mufti, the person must be changed after every 4 years, the person must accept peaceful transition, whether or not the person...
No yardstick to even measure.
Nothing. And so the periodic transmissions, let's go back to wars, guns and votes. I think it was written, is a book written by, I've forgotten the name of the author. But the argument then is that for democracy to work for any country whatsoever, then there are conditions that must be met. Those conditions have not been met in Nigeria. Those conditions have not been met in many African countries.
What are those conditions?
For instance, you will have to have education. I'll give you an instance. For somebody living in any part of Nigeria who had never been to a proper school before, who doesn't know what his next meal is, where his next meal is coming from, who doesn't know where his next bottle of codeine is coming from, talking about drug abusers, and then you tell him that he has a franchise that can be compromised by 500 naira, then what is that franchise to him? Again, before you even make democratic decisions, it is assumed that you have the intellect to understand what is at stake. How many Nigerians can sit down and have presidential candidates discuss their budget and their economic plans? That's why our politicians love to banter. They love to, what in our language they call it, they love to, yab at each other. Look at, that's the Dino Malaya kind of politicians. People experience, that's it.
Instead of discussing issues.
Because if you are discussing issues, people don't understand them. How many campaign rallies have you gone to? And you hear the candidates discussing their issues. They're only telling you, they're only dancing, using party slogan, because that's what the people can understand. Since the majority of the populace...
setting the template? Because if you don't, if Nigerians, for instance, or the media, which substantially has a role now, setting the tone for the conversation or setting the tones for engagement, you realize the political atmosphere is left open for everybody to decide what to do. But in developed climes where you have this kind of conversation, engagement, intellectual engagement among participants, if you like, or those seeking elective positions, you'll find out that the templates have already been set for them.
You have to acknowledge the role of, for instance, literacy rates in all of this. For the woman who had not gone to school, who doesn't know what you're talking about, no matter what the media does. In fact, you know what? They would tune off and tune to the media where they are discussing what she can understand. Because she doesn't understand budget. She doesn't understand open budgeting, zero-based budgeting. You're just speaking grammar to the person. So if you don't, according to the book, there are certain conditions. There are, key indicators. For instance, literacy rates must be there. And so Africa has not achieved that literacy rate. And therefore, if you give franchise to an uneducated man, he will carry that franchise, him and the franchise, inside the dustbin.
Was it a deliberate effort now to weaken the electorates, for instance? Because just like we've seen poverty being weaponized in order to, get people to submit, because they have to submit. They're looking for what to eat. People would give out their franchise to one who doesn't, who shouldn't have gotten it from them, but because they are hungry, they just need something to survive, and so on and so forth. Not because they want it, but because of the poverty that has been weaponized and so on. And then here we have, lack of investment in education, just like you said. Substantially, you find out that nobody is talking about setting a benchmark or monitoring investment, government's investment at both national and sub-national levels on education, which is critical, just like you said.
If you look, the history of Africa did not start in the 19th century or in the 1950s to 1960s, where many African states began to regain their independence. People don't know this, but before the first white man ever set foot on Africa, Benin City here in Edo State had a functional street light system. Go and read it up. Africa had functional societies. You had the empires in the north. You had your Sokoto Emirate. You had them functioning well.
Even the literacy level, the educational system that is before the coming of.
Africa had systems that were working for them across cultures before you now try to tell us everybody to migrate. And while democracy may be better than what we heard, the transition from where we are to where you want us to be, if it is not followed methodically and sequentially, then you could now erode us and set us further years back. And so I think that if you look at the countries and at the continents, at the regions who had retained a substantial part of their form, that they are doing better. I take you back again to the Middle East. I take you back again to Asia. I take you back even to India. Right? And so you see that these people retained a substantial part of their societal cohesion and the societal structure. Don't come pretending that we don't have chiefdoms, that we don't have emirates, that we don't even know. In fact, I can tell you today, many people defer more to their chiefdoms, to their kingdoms, to their emirates, than they defer to their local government chairmen. And so why do you then want to force us? And today you have used the laws to break down those emirates, to break down those, you saw the change,
their influence,
to whittle the influence, and you now see today that even town union associations are no longer as powerful as they used to be. So I think that Africa has to have a fundamental rethink. So are we going to focus on the form, or are we going to really look at the substance? Whether we're adopting periodic elections, peaceful transitions, or whatever, the metrics is not on whether APC won, PDP lose, Labour Party won. The metrics is the average of the average life. How has infrastructure been improved? How has the ordinary man? So whether you're functioning under a democracy or under a quote-unquote military dictatorship that almost plunged Nigeria into war with Niger, what you should be asking is the life of the common man improving? And so if you find it improving, regardless of the form of government, support it. That is what happened, the mistake Africa made with Libya, that we wanted to get democracy by all means in Libya. Today, you have set back Libya by at least a factor of 100 years.
So if I understand your position, you align with the thoughts and position of former President Olusegun Obasanjo. Yes, he talked about Afro-democracy. If I understand, perhaps he's talking about making democracy, to have the kind of bearing, resonate with the people, looking at their cultures, and all of that. Putting all of that to have a form of democracy that will work for us. Is it the position?
It's a position that is worth exploring.
Right.
By the way, the borders in Africa are artificially drawn. You know, People sat down at Berlin conference and put a line across Africa and called the different continents. And that's why you see people who you can't find a difference between some Nigerians and some Nigerians, some Nigerians and some Cameroonians, because they're just one community speaking one language, drinking water from the same stream.
Artificially
you call them different countries. And so you have that artificial demarcation that Africa has to talk about. At some point, we need to find the courage to discuss that, right? And that's number one. Then number two is, after we've done that, we have to find the courage to redefine our constitutions. Many of the things you find in constitutions of many African states are not original ideas. These are copy and paste ideas that were dumped on us. These were people who were prescribing. For instance, you see the sheer prescriptivism of the West. For instance, trying to recommend to African states to adopt same-sex marriage. How has same-sex marriage now become something that we should talk about as you know, human rights? When has people who are not able to feed, and you're now coming to tell us that same-sex marriage, you see it in Kenya, you see it. These are things that the West intentionally want to put their own societal structure and enforce it on us. They're now telling us about our population. Why would we?
Neoliberal colonialism, you know,
and then they are telling us, prescribing the way we will function our economy, the way we will design our naira, the way we design our business atmosphere. So I think Africans must sit down to ask critical questions. And these questions will be difficult to ask, but we need to have that discussion before we can make progress.
Thank you very much. We need to have a rethink, we need to have a focus, we need to come together and look at things that are not working for us and then make them work for us in line with our realities and so on. Thank you very much, Chima, Christian Chima, for talking to us on Daily Politics.
It's always a pleasure to be on your platform. Thank you for having me.
Right, and viewers, this is where we come to the end of this conversation on the platform. I do hope you had the conversation engaging and informative. If you do, why don't you join us tomorrow, where we'll be back with another interesting personalities and topics. Until then, I'm Shafiu Suleiman, thanking you for staying with us.